trust me, I hear enough confessions. I can tell you, I hear the worst that humanity has to offer.
No doubt. Yeah.
After that, there's no book that can shock or scandalize. But also after all that, I'm kind of like, I really don't want to read more about sin. I want to read something really uplifting after hearing, 2 hours of people cheating on their spouses and, having abortions and this. And I'm like, I'm done with that. Like,
Yeah, so your experience has kind of informed the stuff that you pick up.
Welcome to Restless. My name is Father Joseph Gill, priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, and you've joined Joe and Lauren. Excuse me, Joe and Diane.
Oh, wow.
And Diane, I'm sorry. I'm really tired tonight, apparently. Joe and Diane, that's Diane over there, right there. There she is.
We've only known each other for like 5+ years.
5, 6 years, 7 years, I don't know, but my fault.
It's okay.
Anyway, you've joined us on Restless, so thank you so much for joining us. I've been reading a great book lately.
What's that?
And I think you have been too.
I actually just finished reading a great book.
Did you?
Yeah.
What was your great book?
I was reading the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I don't know if you've heard of them. It's pretty obscure author.
Is it about
J.R.R.
jewelry
Tolkien.
or something?
Yeah, that's right. It's about jewelry. This is my third attempt to read the series. I'll be honest. I've always found them quite boring. In the past, I read through The Hobbit twice, and I actually enjoyed that one. And the first time I tried The Fellowship, I made it through 2/3 and gave up.
Oh,
and
so
the second time I made it through like 2 sentences and gave up.
Oh.
This time I actually thoroughly enjoyed them. So
okay,
yeah.
So you're in a different place in your life, perhaps.
I guess so. That's it. What are you
or
reading?
Did you read like Cliff's Notes version, or
Yes,
like had pictures in it, or something?
I watched the movie. Let's be honest. I'm
Read
just
the
kidding.
book. Quote,
I think it takes less time to read the books and watch all those movies with extended cuts, though. So
That's true.
Entirely possible.
Yeah.
But I started reading Lord of the Rings many years ago when it first came out. Not when it first came out, but when the movies first came out. And after 100 pages, they're still in the Shire, and I'm like, I'm bored.
So have you not read through them all?
I've never read through them all.
So
No.
here I thought it was a requirement for ordination to be valid to read through them all, but I guess not.
No.
Or maybe.
It's not. It's not. But
Well.
but tell me, and I know your answer is going to be, what's better, the book or the movies?
So actually, I haven't seen the movies.
What? Wait, whoa.
The books are truly beautifully written. Like they're really incredible.
Maybe I
prose.
need to give
And
another
as you read
chance.
them, I'm sort of just in awe. Like every once in a while, I flirt with the possibility that maybe I could write fiction at some point. And then I read Tolkien, and I'm like, oh, never mind. Like I might be able to write anything that's called fiction, but it's never going to be anything as sort of like magisterial as this. So I'm sure the movies are fine.
I mean, lots of people. No, the movies I think are very well done.
Yeah.
And it kind of drives me crazy when people say, "Oh, the book's better than the movies," because they're different art forms.
Yeah.
Right. A book is a book, and a movie is a movie. I mean, it's like saying, "Wow, that song is better than that painting." Well, I mean, like, how do you judge them?
Because they're different
Right.
art forms.
Very different.
Sure.
So anyway, so our topic today is about reading and about whether or not reading is important in the life of a
That's
Christian.
true,
Because
yeah.
I mean, a lot of us. I mean, we read like a lot of like super
anyway, so our
cheap
topic
stuff,
today is
like in
about
terms of like
reading and about
blogs or
whether or not reading
most of my
is
reading is
important
done
in life of a
online.
Christian,
Yeah.
Is that the same as
because
sitting down and reading a novel? I don't know. I mean, what do you think? First of all, do you think Christians need to read?
Most of my reading is done online. Is that the same as sitting down and reading a novel? I don't know. I mean, what do you think? First of all, do you think Christians need to read?
And just, great authors who have insights, and I think it helps you to kind of self-reflect and think about the things, our own imperfections and attachments, and and I think it can be very inspiring to just kind of, especially saints and blesseds who have struggled with things that we've struggled with, to read about how sort of they overcame their whatever it was, whatever they struggled with. But the fact, like, I don't know, that they weren't perfect and that it was a battle. But I don't know, for me, it's always encouraging and very uplifting to read those spiritual things because, it gives me hope that, through prayer, through grace, through the sacraments and stuff, that God does transform us. But it also, like, it inspires you to go beyond yourself, to be courageous, to, when you kind of read these heroic stories about what other people have done for Christ and how they've used their gifts.
Now, can I fight back on that a little bit?
Okay.
Because I
do an anti-reading take that we're about to hear. There should be no books.
No,
No books.
burn them all. No,
One book only, the Bible. That's it. The only every other book.
I love reading Lives of the Saints, and I read every single one I can get my hands on. I absolutely love it.
Okay.
But it's many of them have been very, very discouraging to my spiritual life.
Why?
Because instead of focusing perhaps on the struggles, they make them out to seem so perfect and have so many mystical experiences, mystical gifts, and true gifts from God that I look at that and I'm like, there's no way. There's just no way, you know?
I guess it depends what you're reading. Like, one of the books that I go to the most, Divine Intimacy. Have you guys heard of it? Father Gabriel?
Yes, I read that quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's... I mean, he gets into the nitty-gritty of life and, you know, the problems and the pride and all of these things that we all succumb to. And, I mean, Augustine's Confessions, too. I mean, yeah, they do have sort of, obviously, some that have mystical experiences. But I think, depending on what you read, it's very realistic and encouraging.
It is, depending on what you read. Yeah, I mean, I like Divine Intimacy, but Divine Intimacy, I have to always take with a large grain of salt because it was written for cloistered religious.
Yeah.
So he says a lot about like detachment from the world. Like don't have any particular, they call them particular friendships, where you like have a friendship with one person because you should have universal charity towards all. That doesn't work in the real world.
Yeah, that's true.
That works only in cloistered.
So it's actually like affirmatively bad in the real world, I would say. Not just doesn't work, but I think it's actually undesirable in the real world.
And so I kind of have to filter what he says. He talks about obedience, and like the kind of obedience that a religious practice is different than the kind of obedience you would practice, or even I would practice as a diocesan priest. Mm-hmm. So you always have to adjust it.
That's true, but I think you can take a lot. I mean, I've taken a lot from. I know it's not written for me as a layperson, but in terms of like detachment from
there's
my
a lot
will,
of good stuff in that book.
having God as the center of like God should be the primary, like the ultimate desire of our lives, and so like having God, it just helps me with sort of the eternal versus temporal perspective of what's truly important and what's not, and then what I should stress about and what I shouldn't, and
that's true. Yeah,
ways vices too, and virtues. He goes through a lot of those, so I find that super helpful.
Yeah, but I think we do have to be judicious and prudent on what we read, certainly, which kind of brings us to our next question of what should we as Christians read, and how should we understand it and filter it? Right? I mean, we're not like Bible only or only. Lives of the Saints.
Yeah, and I honestly think that that's a real trap you could fall into, which is like, well, I'm only going to read the Bible and the Catechism and anything Ratzinger wrote and like Lives of the Saints. And those are all good things, obviously. But there's also like a whole literary tradition out there. And, to the extent that literature, if an author of a novel is really like an integrated person who's really trying to express something about reality, it comes through in the pages, and there's a Christic sort of lens to that because reality is ultimately Christic, right? So even if the author is not a Christian or is not writing from a Christian perspective, to the extent that what they're writing about is true about the world, it will have undertones that are relevant to us Christians. And so I really think it's really essential for Catholics especially to feed their mind with things that aren't just theology and spiritual reading, but also just the sort of the classics of the Western, and even maybe not the Western canon, right? I mean, we've talked about Lord of the Rings, which are more Christian, and I'm a huge fan of C.S. Lewis's fiction, like a huge fan, but also Christian. But even like I was on a big Steinbeck kick this year, so I read The Grapes of Wrath and The Winter of Our Discontents. I mean, just beautiful books, especially The Winter of Our Discontents. Beautiful novel. And it's not, I think Steinbeck does kind of weave in some Christian themes, but I wouldn't say that they wouldn't be in the Christian section of Barnes and Noble or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. But they reflect reality, and so you still tease out these moral themes, which are beautiful.
Well, the Second Vatican Council talks about what they call seeds of the word, that in any culture there's something that is a preparation for the gospel. And you can see that in some secular music. I mean, one of the this is strange, I know, but like one of the pieces of music I like the most one of the artists I like the most is Simon and Garfunkel, who are not Christian in any way, shape, or form. They use some Christian imagery, but more than that, there's a longing from the human heart that cries out through their songs. That if you know what the longing is meant for, they're very beautiful songs. But you can hear that preparation for the gospel there. So I mean, it sounds like there's that preparation for the gospel elements that kind of draw us towards.
I think you, though, have the maturity to be able to see that. I don't know that everyone... I do think you have to be careful about what, you pick up, because there's certainly, impure literature and a lot of things. There's a lot of garbage that you could say, oh, well, this is speaking to these desires. They're just like looking for this fulfillment in the wrong way. But unless you have sort of that maturity and wisdom and strength... then I would say you could easily fall into just, like the narrative that whatever that author is trying to spell, you know, and just like
Well,
giving into passion, selfishness.
none of us here remember the days when there was actually a Catholic index of banned books
Right.
that came from the Vatican, and there were certain books would go on it, mostly books of theology, but I think probably some fiction too, and
Yeah.
that this is harmful and Christians are forbidden
Right.
from reading it. It's kind of that recognition that, like, yeah, books can have a really powerful impact on our minds.
Yeah, but I think that one thing we may have not lost exactly, but lost sight of a little bit is the extent to which, like, Christians throughout history are oftentimes like true men and women of their age and truly polymathic in a way. It seems to me to be a somewhat recent phenomenon of the sort of like professional Christian apologetic person who that's kind of their whole world. I mean, Augustine read Cicero. You know what I mean? Like, that was important to him.
Sure. And that's what actually drew Augustine to St. Ambrose, is
Right.
that Ambrose was so
Right.
well versed in the pagan philosophers.
Right, exactly. And so, if you're going to go out into the world, might be useful, and try to like convert people, right? It might be useful to read the things they've read. And so you can say like, hey, remember that character you read in that book we've all read? Well, remember how awful they are? Well, this is why they're awful, because they have no relation with God. Or like, remember this interesting theme? Like, remember the sort of the love that the spouses have at the end of the book? Well, like, there's all these, again, these themes you can kind of tease out. And
Seeds of the word, yeah.
yeah, and we just had a day of recollection at the end of the year. I'm sure you remember all yours very fondly from your time in seminary. There was a wonderful experience for all involved. And
I don't remember any of them, I don't believe.
yeah,
but-
and so usually they're fine. But this one was phenomenal. This one was, I'm sure you're familiar with Monsignor James Shea, President University of Mary.
Yes, he's actually
yeah.
the graduating speaker of Cardinal Kung Academy this year.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, well he was phenomenal.
Good.
And
Good, I look forward to
one of the things
hearing
I
him.
was most struck by listening to him talk is just how deeply literate he is. I mean, because he was weaving, and he was just, no notes in front of him. And he was weaving through literature and history, church history, secular history. And it's one thing to just sort of read from the catechism, but it's another thing to take the teachings of the church and the good news about Jesus Christ and to sort of deliver it with this sort of immense, incredible sort of woven tapestry, with taking threads out of the Western canon, and it's just you experience, you're like, oh my goodness, you know what I mean? Like it surely changes the way you receive it.
Well, this morning the deacon that I live with was kind of ribbing me because he came down. I was eating my breakfast, and when I eat my breakfast, I generally catch up on the news, and so I'm looking at Drudge Report, which is kind of my go-to. It's kind of, I know it's
Okay.
because it's bizarre, and AP News and all kinds of stuff, CNN, like you gotta see everything, right? And I told him what I was doing, and he's like, I turned that off. There's no good news. But I remember a quote from Saint Jose Maria Escrivá, who said the modern apostle has to go out with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other.
Right.
So it is that you need that staying connected, even to current events, which is not something I particularly relish.
Sure.
Because they're so vapid and usually pretty,
Yeah.
stupid.
Yeah, but I think that's the value of good literature, right? Because it feeds the mind in a way that the Drudge Report certainly, or other things like that just aren't going to. It's one thing to sort of teach a class and be like, all right, God doesn't send anybody to hell. We condemn ourselves to hell because of our sin. Blah 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 blah. It's another thing to be like, all right, if you read the final, spoiler alert if anybody hasn't read The Final Battle when C.S. Lewis wrote it however many decades ago, but it's another thing to point to the final scene where the dwarf. I don't know if you read that book.
No, I haven't.
Have you read The Final
No.
Battle? There's this scene very
You gonna
quickly.
spoil it for us?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Go ahead.
These evil dwarves turn on Aslan, this great battle at the end, and the army, they're against both armies, the good and bad, and so they're forced into this shed that they all think has this awful demon in it. It's actually a portal to heaven, as it's sort of laid out in this book. And so they all go through the portal, and all these dwarves are sitting in a circle in this beautiful like paradise. It's basically, it's like this beautiful paradise. And the dwarves are sitting in a circle, and they think that they're in the shed still. So in other words, they're complaining about how cold and how dank it is because they're in this shed, and they're in this beautiful like meadow. And the whole point of it is that because they rejected Aslan, they might be physically in heaven, but their mind they're trapped in hell of their own creation.
They've taken hell with them.
Right. So again, there's the theology, and then there's the way that it relates to your heart, right? And so I think that literature helps us kind of get deeper, and it kind of it stirs things up in us. And God gave us the passions, right? God gave us emotions to be kind of pulled at by these things. So it just seems to me that not just for tactical reasons, but just for your own. I mean, for my own like devotion, these things have been tremendously important, and I really think it's important for Catholics to let their minds be fed by truly good literature.
So you sounds like you read a lot of fiction. Do you read fiction, or is it mostly?
I'd say I read mostly spiritual things, just because I think it depends on your state in life. I mean, imagine seminary. I know that you work hard and are busy, but there's a lot of, I'm
Lot
sure,
more time.
there's a lot more time to,
Sure.
to indulge in books and things like that. For me, it's like during busy season when I'm working 70 hours a week,
Yeah.
I don't have the time to open up a novel, and I have to prioritize, right? Because I can get really sucked into my work and just the day to day. And for me, it's like, I feel like it's an obligation to put the spiritual, I mean, number one, it relaxes me, but number two, it's like order of priority and like the amount of time that you have, that there's
Yeah.
That's certainly fair.
like different stages of your life when, maybe when you're older or something, it's if you're retired and you're just sitting at home watching TV all day, it's a great thing to, kind of dive in.
Yeah.
But if you're a young parent, and you're working tons of hours and you're taking care of your kids, or
Sure.
you're working a really crazy, just demanding job, then I think you have to, for me, it's just been about like right ordering of things. And I feel like the spiritual is much more helpful in terms of like the exact, because I mean, you have time built into the day for like the meditation and self-reflection, and of course I go to daily mass and I do that as well, but probably not as much time, so the spiritual reading really helps
Sure.
me
Yeah, definitely.
in that sense to kind of
Yeah, that's all fair. But
You're absolutely
recollect.
right.
yeah, but if I could just say, like, yeah, I totally take all that. That's totally fair. A lot of my day is spent reading things,
Yeah.
other things, and so by the time I get to the end of the day, often the last thing I really want to do is crack open another book.
Read, yeah.
And what I'm reading during the day is not, it's not spiritual stuff for my own devotion, right?
Yeah.
It's mostly philosophy and Latin stuff or whatever. And I made a decision at the beginning of this year, which is my first like academic year of seminary, which was I don't want to graduate seminary and hate reading because I've been forced to do it for 7 years.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be the priest who doesn't read a book after he's ordained. And so I made a decision that I'm going to find a way to enjoy reading, even when it's also a chore. And my solution to that is that I make sure to also read things that I enjoy. And so, I think that there's a tremendous value to fiction. I also enjoy it. And so I don't spend hours reading it. When I'm going to bed, I'll read it for a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And you just, you slowly pick through books,
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, and I should say that, like right now, I just finished Lord of the Rings. There's now some spiritual stuff I've been meaning to read. So I'm gonna read that, and then I'm gonna go back to fiction. So I think it's okay to go back and forth. And yeah, certainly reading the spiritual classics is essential. I really think that like a lot of the saints who we're taking as our models in that reading also engage with the wider culture through the reading of what were the classics in their day. And so I think that's an important dimension.
But reading maybe 150 years ago was probably akin to watching TV today, in the sense that like if you want to know what people are thinking and experiencing and what a culture is all about, back then you read. Now, like I guarantee 99% of the parishioners that you'll encounter as a parish priest have never read Lord of the Rings. They may have seen the movies,
Sure.
but probably never read it. So if you really want to know what's culturally on people's mind, I don't know that reading like the classics, like Shakespeare, is really going to be on people's minds.
And I take a point. I think you should also engage with the art forms that people are engaging with. But again, it's not just about the tactical advantage you get by being able to be culturally literate. It's also about the extent that it feeds you. And
It's both.
Yeah,
it's both. You
right.
read for your benefit and you read for others' benefit too.
Right.
I mean, I remember when Hunger Games came out, I worked in youth ministry. I had to read them.
Sure. Yeah.
And they were actually pretty good. I really enjoyed them.
Yeah.
I think everyone has different tastes too. For me, spiritual reading is fun. People might think that's nerdy, but like
that's great.
I think it's
You also think it's fun to
fascinating.
spend time with numbers all day. So
This is true.
Truly, God bless you. If that's the case. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's definitely not true for me. So
there's
that's
got to
good.
be people
But
like
there are
that.
there are certain fiction books that I'm like that you might mention, and I'm just like I have zero interest in that.
Sure.
So it's like everyone has their. I think you just have to find what you enjoy.
That's right. I
It's not
got in a
tearing your soul out.
gigantic debate over at Cardinal Kung with one of the 8th grade girls actually about Jane Austen.
Okay.
Who
I haven't read her, but she's supposed to be very good.
save your soul. Don't read her. I don't know.
Save my soul or save my time?
Save your time.
Okay.
Maybe save your soul too. I don't know, but yeah. And so I was arguing that her books are all the same because it's all just about girl gossiping about guy, girl not happy that guy snubbed her, going to parties, gossiping more, and that was kind of like every book by her. And and so she was arguing, no, this is good art. This is good art. And so we kind of took a poll, and it was pretty much split down the middle. All the girls thought it was good art, and all the guys thought
Do they have to read it
terrible.
for their?
Not in 8th grade. No, but we asked the teachers. And
okay, I'm just shocked that anybody's in the middle school and high school has read Jane Austen.
high school,
frankly.
yeah, no,
So,
it's part of
Okay,
the
cool.
high school curriculum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But,
used to get offended. It was kind of like music, you know. Everyone has different tastes, so it's if someone doesn't like the song that you love or the book that you love,
Uncultured Philistine.
yeah,
Nothing
no,
to do with you.
exactly. I think as I've gotten older, you just realize that people are so different, and we have different gifts, different personalities, different temperaments, and
I'll
so,
be honest, like high school made me hate reading.
Right.
Because the books they selected, I thought were
Yeah.
terrible. I had to read Charles Dickens. I'd rather watch paint dry than read Charles Dickens again. He's so, in my opinion, boring.
Sure.
Others obviously liked him at some point because he became world famous, right? And
David
Yeah.
Copperfield.
I didn't read that one.
Oh,
It was
okay.
Tale of Two
That was a
Cities.
good
That was
one.
pretty bad. That was dry as a bone.
Yeah, I get what you mean though.
Yeah, it was a tough slog, and maybe it's because I was 15 at the time,
Right.
and we're just in a very different place in my mental, intellectual life. But
Also, I think that you kind of hinted at this when you were talking about how you consume news, but we've become used to the sort of the article or the tweet, And
Yeah.
so,
Short attention
look,
span.
I click on an article and I see the scroll bars this big, and I'm like, maybe not. Maybe I'll, maybe I'll find something shorter. So
it's like 15-minute read.
right,
I don't think I
so
can commit to
Yeah.
that.
So we're used to like quick takes, short texts, and I think that's why I couldn't read Lord of the Rings when I was younger, because I think I was really immersed in that.
Yeah.
And
Well, when you went through your year without a cell phone, I'm sure that probably slowed down your attention span. I'd imagine.
Yeah, it did, and I found that I read a lot more. And still, I tried to read Moby Dick, and I made it a couple nights, and I was like, honestly, sitting in silence would be better than reading this book. But yeah, I do think it's also something good about trying just push back a little bit against the culture of quick reads, quick everything, and just being able to kind of sit and slowly. There are certain books you just can't flip in and out of. Like some books you can take 5 minutes, 10 minutes at night. And I've tried to do that with Paradise Lost. Not going to happen, right? You need to really sit down and commit an amount of time to that, in settings. So I just think it's also something good about being able to be, I mean, I'm sure this has happened to you guys where you really get lost in a book and like a whole day goes by or like 4 hours go by and like, oh my goodness. It's night now.
Which is
it
why
was day a second ago.
I don't understand when you talk about 5-10 minutes before you go to bed, because if I start reading anything, it's going to be another half hour, 2 hours before I can put it down.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it depends what I'm reading. Some of Lord of the Rings is good for that. You're like, yep, they're still in the woods.
Still in the Shire.
They'll still be there tomorrow.
Nope, not going anywhere.
But I will say that at the end of the book, I was like, I have to go to bed now, but I like to keep reading. So it cuts both ways.
Yeah.
Be careful.
I think you made a good point though about the contemporary culture and just distraction. Like with your phone and the attention span, and a lot of people don't have time, but they also probably don't have sort of the mental capacity now that we're so used to getting things at the tip of our fingers and, constantly checking texts and things like that. So it's kind of I think when people have not read for a while and then start to read, it can be almost an exercise of, like you have to train yourself in staying focused and mentally there and engaged and all that.
Right. So I want to give you a book recommendation because a lot of it, of course, I mean, I think naturally speaking, we look at like the Western canon, as it were. It's people that have lived hundreds of years ago, or Tolkien was 50s.
Yeah, the last century. Yeah.
But is there good literature being written today? And the one that the artist, the art author that I always go to is Michael O'Brien. Who, anybody familiar with him?
No.
Is an author or
author? Yeah.
What did he write?
His most famous book is called Father Elijah. It's about a priest who's given the task of converting the Antichrist.
Okay, I think I've heard you mention that.
Yeah, it's definitely probably the best book I've ever read, hands down. Not only richly written, but also a great plot.
And how do you go about discerning what sort of contemporary books to read? Do you get recommendations from people, or did you read a review online about sort of?
Yeah,
did you check them out before you?
Yeah, I
dived in?
I checked out that one because a kid in my youth group said it was the closest thing to crack he'd ever experienced.
Okay.
Because he couldn't
But that's
put it
coming from,
down.
like, a
It was
12-year-old?
No, it was just like 18 at the time.
Sure.
But I was like, whoa, that sounds
That's
like
awesome.
a great book. I gotta check that out. And it was absolutely addictive. But
Okay.
so once you find an author, you read everything by them. And so I'm working on another Michael O'Brien book now,
Right.
which is really good. And
That was me and Steinbeck. Yeah. That's good.
yeah. So just recently, or coming out in the future, I can't remember. Somewhere around this time period, there is a movie out about Flannery O'Connor, who was one of the great Catholic authors. Have you ever read anything by Flannery O'Connor?
So my last retreat, I got 2 books by Steinbeck and a collection for short stories. I will admit, I didn't love them.
It is
Didn't love
definitely an
them.
acquired taste.
I read a couple of them, and I just didn't get it. So,
I read the short stories and liked it, and then I read one of her novels, and I
Okay.
was like, this is, whoa, no.
yeah.
But that brings up an interesting question, because one of the things that she does really, really well is picturing like the worst of humanity, showing really just the grotesque, some grotesque creatures,
Sure.
people who are totally depraved, and doesn't hide it, doesn't sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
So what is the role of a Catholic writer or Catholic art to show the real evil of the human condition? I mean, should we show it point blank without sugarcoating it, or should there be some sort of a modesty that maybe hints at evil but doesn't make it blatant?
Yeah, I think a good artist can do that, right? Which is I don't think you have to write pornography to convince people in your book that there is evil in the world, right? But Christian art shouldn't be like you took a peep out of the box at Easter, right? It shouldn't be like sugar covered marshmallow, right? There should be substance to it. You know what I mean?
love peeps.
Yeah, they're fine as candy, but they're not as literature, right? So
That's fair. That's
Christian art should really shouldn't. This is the world we live in.
Yeah,
we should be engaging with it. We shouldn't be engaging in a world that doesn't exist.
That's always my beef with a lot of the Protestant movies that come out. Like, no offense to the company that does it, but like Fireproof and
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
No,
Never will watch it. Probably
you should watch it just so you know kind of like what like Protestant art is like, and it's a lot of that peep like fluff
Prosperity gospel.
Not even that. It's just like I'm having a really bad day and Jesus came and saved me.
Right.
The end.
Yeah.
Like, it's just there's just nothing in between.
There's a pundit
It's
I used to listen to whose line is always, every Christian movie is just my bunny ran away but Jesus brought it back. It's like, okay, but that's not.
Yeah, that's every Christian movie.
Yeah, right. It's awful. Yeah.
My life is really stinky, but I turned to Jesus and
Yeah.
solved everything.
Right.
That's not how the real world works. And
Yeah.
Well, it's probably important to paint like evil for what it is, because I think a lot of the problems nowadays is people have lost the sense that there is sin, and so if you don't if there's no sin, you don't need a savior. And so what does our faith mean? Well, yeah, why is it important?
Yeah.
So I think living in reality.
Yeah.
Society is not living in reality nowadays. It's like a front on objective truth, and
yeah.
so yeah, that's very important.
I actually like what Flannery O'Connor herself said about this, because she was often criticized for her grotesqueness.
Sure.
And she said, when people can hear and see well,
Right, yeah.
you can use muted colors and soft sounds, but when people are blind and deaf, you have to shout.
Right. I think that there are two different approaches outlined by C.S. Lewis and by J.R.R. Tolkien, right? So, people say that Tolkien, that The Lord of the Rings is not strict allegory, and I'll take their word for it. But even if it was, it wouldn't be much different than it is. It's amazing. But I think it speaks to the extent to which the Christian truth was integrated in Tolkien's life, such that when he wrote about when he was writing, thinking of it himself, it was Christian. And you can see the allegories, you can see the parallels, and it's beautiful, even if it's not intended as such. If you read Lewis, his fiction, it's almost one-to-one allegory.
Yeah,
the final battle is almost the Book of Revelation. I can't remember the name of the first book, not the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, but the one that actually comes first. But it's basically Genesis.
Yeah.
Space Trilogy is some of my favorite books, and they're like this, and there's a place for it. There's a place for it because I think people can read them and then relate the gospel back to those stories. I do think that Tolkien's method, there's something almost more brilliant about it, which is engaging with the world and telling beautiful stories, and then they're Christian because you're a Christian and because the world is Christian. Mm-hmm. But there's tremendous value to what Lewis writes. I'm a huge advocate of reading his fiction. To me, it's almost the same thing as reading spiritual reading.
Well, that kind of goes to the point that one of my favorite bands is an obscure band no one's ever heard of called Switchfoot.
I've heard of it.
Oh, thank you. Good. You usually get blank
I haven't,
stares.
but I don't listen to music, so there you go.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Yeah, we should have a whole episode about that.
We need a whole episode about why Christians need to listen to music. But anyway,
I do. It's in Latin when I listen to it, though.
That's not Switchfoot.
That's fair. That's right, definitely not Switchfoot. No, but they always ask him, are you a Christian band? He said, no. We're a band, and we happen to all be Christians. But that's there's no such thing as Christian art. Like there's no such thing as a Christian, cobbler. There's no such thing as a Christian house builder, right?
Right.
There should be no difference between a good house that's built by a Christian and good house that's built by a non-Christian,
right?
In terms of the artistry in it. But of course, you can see that if our faith is beautiful, then it's going to come across in the beauty and the elegance and the dignity of your art. But
and again, art that reflects reality reflects Christ. Mm-hmm. Like if we believe if we actually believe the things we say we believe, then that's true. So again, I don't know Steinbeck's religious affiliation or how devout he was. What I do know, though, is that if you read The Winters of Our Discontent, you encounter human evil and you encounter deep longing and regret. and you encounter true, love, and you encounter the way those interact with each other. And I don't know, again, if he went to mass on Sundays and went to church on Sundays, but what I do know is that is a Christian book. At least to the extent that it reflects reality, and I see the Christian, I see the reality of Christ and the reality of human sinfulness and his redemption and humanity. I see it all over those pages.
Yeah,
and that's a beautiful thing. And I think sometimes Christians can be a little like fortress mentality, where it's like, well, if it's not written by a Christian for Christians to be Christian, I don't want to look at it. It's like that's so stupid. Like just engage with. I mean,
at the same time, and that's absolutely true. But at the same time, we do have to know ourselves in terms of what can we handle, because there are some things that will deeply disturb. And we actually kind of talked about this in a former episode about how, if people are attracted to God through beauty, then art and literature can really upset the soul when it glorifies evil, or when it shows evil too bluntly, perhaps, but to kind of like corrupt a soul that is innocent, that didn't know that kind of evil existed, or maybe knew about it but didn't want to really engage in it. Yeah. Because not everybody, I think, is called to be on the front lines. Some people are called to live a very simple, humble life as a father or mother, and just guard your family from the evil rather than bring the evil in to deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's totally.
Because I wouldn't I wouldn't take young kids to the seedy part of town and be like, all right, guys, we're going into a bar just to see what it's like, and don't engage in it, but just see it, because you got to see the world.
Totally.
Whoa, they'll be like, no, don't do that, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and it depends. Going back to my point on maturity, it depends like what lens because you're looking at that through your Catholic lens and your formation and stuff. Other people might just kind of are more on the surface level. So not to say that book in particular is dangerous or anything like that, but I just think some of these things about the human person and the human condition, especially like addictions and things that you struggle with, like you just have to be careful about what you expose yourself to and what you're exposing your kids to.
Knowing yourself is always an important thing. But I will say that, in the same way you wouldn't bring a kid to the worst part of town and show them around, an adult who didn't know there was the worst part of town there'd be something lacking in him, right? So I think at the same time, as we should be shielding ourselves, we should also be able to like accept that there is bad and engage with it, to the extent that we can, right? So if you're an alcoholic, or if you struggle with sins of lust, then maybe you shouldn't be reading certain books, like totally fine. But I still think that you shouldn't be like hiding under a rock. You know what I mean? I don't think that that's really the posture kind of Christ envisions for us.
You say hiding under a rock as if it's a bad thing to want to preserve one's own innocence, though.
No, I don't think it is. Again, I think
not to be ignorant of the evil that's out there, but
I think you can engage with that evil, in keeping with your own limitations. But
I do think a good question would be asking yourself, would our Blessed Mother read this? I don't know. I mean,
I don't. Yeah, I mean,
I want to have her virtues.
Yeah, I guess I don't know what book we're talking about. Like, I'm not saying read 50 Shades of Grey, right? Like, I'm saying read John Steinbeck, right? So
I've never read John Steinbeck. Yeah, but
so like,
would
the Blessed Mother have read the Old Testament? You know what I mean? Like,
that's true. And the Old Testament is pretty X-rated at many parts.
She would have read about Abraham, and maybe check out what he was up to sometimes. Like, there, the bad things.
There's
happen.
a lot of sketchy stuff in the Bible.
We can just read. I don't know what book of the Bible you pick to just read if you want to avoid that stuff.
Psalms.
I mean, all of them.
Still talks about kick their teeth in and like smash the babies against the rock.
Right, there were four that were taken out of the breviary.
Yeah, there's 4 psalms.
Right? So all I'm saying is that the book God gives us to read to know Him contains human sinfulness in it. That's all I'm saying.
And it is important.
You're arguing with Jesus, not me, Father. Okay.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and there are many people in the world today who, to your point, have lost the sense of sin, that they're like, they just think they're okay, and we're not okay. That's the whole point of the story. That's why Jesus came. That's why we have a savior. That's why we needed a savior, because we're not okay.
And I think it's critical to foster that sensitivity to sin, in the fact that when our Blessed Mother read the Old Testament, which I'm sure she did frequently, she probably would have been horrified by it. Right. Versus somebody who's perhaps read it so much that is almost desensitized to them, and maybe not even the amount of times you read it, just the lack of
your posture when you read it. Yeah,
your posture and your lack of your lack of interior life.
Right.
Because I can read a lot with a deep interior life that might challenge other people without one.
Totally fair. And I'm horrified by the human evil on display in the Holocaust, for example. I still read Night and Watch Schindler's List. You know what I mean? So again, I think now there are people who probably really couldn't read that book or watch that movie because it would be truly scarring to them, and they shouldn't read it and watch it. But I think that most Christians can and should engage with things like that, because otherwise what we're doing is we're doing this. right? And again, I don't think that's
That's
a real way
really
to live.
hard for our radio listeners to
And
see
yeah,
what you're doing.
our fancy camera right there captured it perfectly, so they can go.
He
And,
put on,
they can
he
go-
put
they
on
can-
blinders on his eyes.
They can
or
go and
something.
watch the video as you know.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm encouraging them to engage
That's
more
right.
fully.
Please
in our products.
engage.
Yeah.
Yes, on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't think we should go walking through life as if all that exists is the good, because that simply isn't true.
This simply is not true. Absolutely. And some of us are called to fight it head on, and others are called to perhaps focus on the good, true, and beautiful. Maybe trust me. I hear enough confessions. I can tell you, I hear the worst that humanity has to offer.
No doubt. Yeah.
After that, there's no book that can shock or
Right.
scandalize. But also after all that, I'm kind of like, I really don't want to read more about sin. I want to read something really uplifting after hearing, 2 hours of people cheating on their spouses and, having abortions and this and that. I'm like, I'm done with that. Like,
Right.
Yeah, so your experience has kind of informed the stuff that you pick up, I'm sure.
I'd imagine like police officers probably feel the same thing,
Yeah.
right? They probably would not want a crime novel when
Maybe.
they
Yeah, probably.
when they relax.
Yeah, I didn't think about it like that, actually.
But anyway, so definitely it's time for us to
well
wrap
over,
up.
yeah.
But
Good.
but that's okay because we had a great discussion about reading. So it is indeed important in the spiritual life, not only to read spiritual books, but also just to read good literature, things that are true, beautiful, and goodness, that show the authenticity of the human condition, and read it through the deep lens of your Catholic faith, knowing that we have, even whatever awful things might be in the book, that we do have a Savior. And that's the good news, is that we know how the story ends, how this story of life ends.
Spoiler alert.
And how the story of this episode ends. So you can find us on Veritas Catholic Network 1350 AM or 103.9 FM. Now on YouTube, on Spotify, Google Play, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts. I don't even know what. Yeah. And 1,000 other different places online. So Google, comment, like, subscribe, all that jazz. Tune in next time.